Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. In common with most of the UK's theatres and other arts venues, Home Manchester announced it would close soon after Prime Minister Boris Johnson's statement on the 16th of March 2020, appealing to the public to stay away from public places to reduce the spread of the coronavirus. A week later, Home announced a series of commissions titled Homemakers from artists, many of whom have created work with the venue before, asking them to devise new works in their homes for audiences who will also be at home. The initiative was created by Home's Associate Director Jude, with whom I spoke online, both in our own homes of course, a few days after the announcement. I asked Jude to explain about the project.
Homemakers is absolutely a response project to the situation that we find ourselves in, and which doesn't mean that it's for artists to make work about coronavirus or the lockdown or the closure of theatres. But we as an organisation wanted to create something which felt like quite an immediate response to the fact that obviously we weren't able to open our doors to audiences. We weren't able to offer them live theatre, which obviously we believe is an important thing in people's lives. We weren't therefore able to offer artists the space to come and create work. And, you know, for us as a building to sort of keep connecting with audiences and with artists. So in the early days of the closure of theatres, Home also set up a response fund, which was an invitation to our audiences to support Home's sort of response to this period and the way that we were going to continue working with artists. And we had an absolutely phenomenal sort of outpouring of love, which was really cheering and really inspiring. And so with all of those things in mind, we sort of came up with a project and sort of just decided to go for it. You know, I think there are things in this particular moment that need us all to take a bit of a breath and a bit of thought and a bit of space. I think it's a really, really huge thing to be facing, and we all know that it's having massive short-term implications on every aspect of our society and on what we do as theatre makers. And we also know that it's going to have huge long-term repercussions. And so alongside a lot of careful thought and stock taking and just giving people space to react to this huge series of events, we also wanted to move quite quickly on specific projects that were really clearly targeted. So Homemakers is specifically aimed at theatre makers and live art makers, I guess people who sit in that territory where they play with form and they play with the forms in which they're working, and they sort of think excitingly about how to connect audiences to one another or to themselves through the way that they're engaging with them. So as well as being a sort of pragmatic response and as wanting to commission artists and make work available to audiences, it felt like there was an opportunity here to give some of those artists space to say, OK, freed from the constraints of people need to travel to our building in order to see this piece of work, and there's an expectation about what the duration of it will be or what the location of it will be. What would you like to make, when the brief for it is this is something that you yourself can make at home, and it will be experienced by an audience who are themselves at home. And so one of the things that I find really exciting about it is that it's not just about saying online can be a replacement for live theatre, because I don't believe that that's true. I think that theatre buildings still need to exist, and they will continue to exist, albeit in altered forms, when the worst of this pandemic passes and we're allowed outside and into communal spaces again. But a lot of the artists that we're working with, excitingly, are taking online as a sort of portal for forging what maybe feels like a bit more of a visceral or a analog connection with people again. So a lot of the projects that people are starting to develop now, and we're right in the early days of it, are to do with using that first point of contact through our website as the beginning of a bit of a journey for an audience, which might involve receiving letters or being asked a series of questions to go and explore with other people in their lives. Or where people are using video, it might be very specifically about a direct message out into the world or an invitation to an audience to watch something communally. So aside from the very strange circumstances and the very difficult circumstances in which the projects come about, as an artistic endeavour, it feels really exciting. And the artists that we're working with We've got Yusra Walsamo working with Thorpe, so they're going to make something together. Javad Alipour, Bryony Kimmings, Plastercast Theatre, and Ad Infinitum.
The press release I got, it shows how fast-moving this situation is. Only a few days ago, it mentioned the people that you've just said, Javad Alipour, Bryony Kimmings, all people you worked with before. But the quotes that we got from Bryony Kimmings and from George Mann of Ad Infinitum, They seem very positive, but they don't seem to have any idea about what they're going to do. So I assume we've moved on since then, and they're starting to formulate something a bit more solid, are they?
Yes, exactly. As I say, it was a really direct response. And yeah, so we've sort of got these quotes from people going, great, cool, what will this be? Yeah. Which, again, as I say, it's part of the spirit and joy of the project. And I think, again, that feels like such an exciting opportunity in terms of engagement with artists. There's something really fun about being able to go to people and say, I don't need you to spend months and months and months telling me what this idea is before we are able to decide whether we're going to properly support you to make it. There's something really exciting about saying, you plus this situation feels exciting, let's just go for it and see what comes out.
You mentioned about the response fund, which is amazing. There's a lot of people very supportive now of theatre and lots of other things as well, because there's a certain amount of momentum. But the longer this goes on, I would imagine that momentum's going to tail off a little bit. So have you thought about the long term of how this sort of project might be funded?
Yeah, so, and as it's worth mentioning, particularly with the Home Response Fund, because obviously we produce and programme theatre, but also visual arts and cinema, and we have a huge engagement and talent development department. As I say, it's not, we haven't sort of swooped in on behalf of theatre makers and taken all of those funds. But what's lovely is it feeling like a real moment of our whole audience community coming together to back what we do. And obviously, there are other strands of work being developed and disseminated across the organisation, as there are across the industry. Yeah, the idea behind the project was also to slightly distinguish it from being, I guess, a fundraising endeavour in itself. And we've structured it quite carefully to think about the extent to which we would like to ask people to pay for the work that they're seeing. Now, what we've decided on is a pay what you decide model, because we thought it was incredibly important that there are no barriers to accessing this work. We're aware that there are people in their houses all over the country, all over the world at the moment, who deserve and must have access to art the same as everyone else. And we didn't want to put a financial barrier in place. However, we wanted to support what we do as an organisation in our daily lives, which is that we set ticket prices for our work because we believe that artists deserve to be paid for it. And we believe that it's something that is worth people investing their money as well as their time in if they're able to. So the model of the project is the artists are paid a commission fee up front for the development and delivery of their piece of work, which is a set fee, which they, there's flexibility then as to how people choose to work, whether they want to sort of pay collaborators to come on board and work with them, or whether they want to invest that money in their own time and their own resources. And then the work is available on our website. As I say, it will be pay what you decide, and absolutely, signposted to say that paying nothing is a completely acceptable option. It doesn't change anything about what you're offered. And then any income from that will be split between the artist whose work it is and Home. So, and going back into the response fund. So, I mean, it's a complicated thing because, as we're all aware, online content is difficult. That people have different expectations, I think, about what should be paid for. And there's a lot of online content out there. But if we do start to see some money coming in through that, for the share that is returned to the Home Response Fund, we would love, if possible, to be able to commission future artists. Obviously, we're sort of working under huge financial challenges, as everyone is at the moment. And so, although we would love to have instantly commissioned 50 artists for this project, it just wasn't possible. And we wanted to make sure that we paid people properly for the work that they were doing. But if possible, if we're able to generate more funds from it, we would like to invest some of that into future commissions. We're also exploring partnerships with other colleagues across the industry, which will be a bit of a moving conversation because obviously every institution and every organisation is facing their own challenges. Everyone's got their own priorities. People are doing incredible work of their own all over, or people are needing a bit of break and a bit of time to recuperate. But I think there might be some points of collaboration, which is exciting because, again, that's in the DNA of what we do as a venue. We work with companies, we work with other organisations. We don't want those relationships to disappear while our building's closed. So it's lovely, partly just being able to sort of reach out and connect with all the brilliant people that we know, and to say we're here, obviously, for anything that you need, and we're in solidarity with you on this. But also, if you'd like to work with us on this, if this is a useful platform in terms of supporting artists, then we'd like to make that available as widely as possible. So we're having those chats, and obviously we'll report as and when things develop.
In a sense, some of this new work, it's collapsing the distances between people. I mean, for a theatre that normally plays to maybe 500 people in a night, you could be playing all of a sudden to 8,000 people at the same time, and across distances where places where people have never heard of your venue. At the moment we're starting to review some online theatre, and I've got somebody in Essex reviewing a show that's in Gloucestershire on the other side of the country, because those distances don't matter. So is it an opportunity to get the name of Home out there and to get the work out to a much bigger audiences, do you think?
Absolutely, I think so. And again, particularly, we're working with a real range of artists in terms of their experience and their profile. Quite a lot of the artists that we're working with are from the Northwest, based in the Northwest, because obviously we're Manchester and those are the people that we love and we connect with. But we're also working with some people who aren't based in the city because we have a long-standing relationship with them. We know that our audiences feel already a sense of real connection and love for them. But yeah, I think this is a great opportunity, as you say, to get Home's name out there, to be able to open our doors metaphorically to people who wouldn't normally be able to make that physical journey to our building. That feels like a really beautiful sort of unexpected side product of the situation, whether that's people around the country or people further afield. And I think also just it's an opportunity to introduce audiences, even local audiences, to artists whose work they might not have come across before, or who it might not have occurred to them to go and visit. There's quite a simple entry point here. You can click on a link on a website, you can choose whether or not you want to make any kind of donation, and then you can experience something new and meet some new brains and some new storytellers.
We've heard a lot about the dark side of the long-term effects of this situation. The financial side is going to hit a lot of people quite badly, artists and theatres and people obviously outside the arts as well. But can you see the way people have had to change the way they look at creating theatre? Do you think that's going to have a long-term effect? Do you think it's going to change theatre in the long term substantially?
I do, yeah. I mean, speaking from within Home, obviously these are conversations that we are only at the very beginning of in terms of us as an organisation. But one of the things that I am finding really comforting, particularly as someone who comes from a kind of freelance artist background, is uniformly within our organisation, but also across the board in terms of anyone that I speak to in other organisations, there's such a sense of duty and responsibility towards the entire freelance workforce, not just artists, but everyone who works independently with our organisations. And there's such a sense of solidarity. I find that really comforting. I do think it's going to make some big changes. I think it's very hard at the moment to say what those will be, because, as you say, there are very immediate financial concerns as well as sort of structural and basic safety. I think that we work in an art form which is incredibly diverse and adaptable, and I have real faith that there are brilliant minds all over the place who are going to come up with really, I was going to say either radical ideas or just incredibly practical ideas, but I think there'll be a lot of innovative thinking, and I think there'll be a lot of excellent people putting that stuff into practice. I think the key at the moment is just the support that everyone is giving each other, whether that's just a bit of space to breathe or just the offer of help where needed, or finding space for those conversations to begin.
I saw, which it sort of made me sit up and notice that somebody said on social media 2 weeks ago the theatres were still open. I thought, is it only 2 weeks ago? It just seems such a long time ago. But I was just wondering, 2 weeks ago, in the last 2 weeks, when all of this hit and it was clear that the theatres were going to have to close, what were the sorts of conversations that were going on amongst people at home, amongst the management and the artists that were there?
I mean, what's been quite bizarre for me is that 2 weeks ago I was in the middle of annual leave, and 3 weeks ago I was in New York, exactly at the point when Broadway shut, which was an interesting sort of precursor to where we've ended up, obviously. I think, as I say, I think that the instant response, there was something, I think, again, from a personal perspective, there was something about it that sort of felt quite inconceivable, because it's like you're seeing this thing approaching and just going, actually, regardless of what the government guidance is, either, advice to potential audience members or then actually coming out and saying theatres need to close at this point, and the distance between those two statements was quite challenging. As I say, it felt quite inconceivable. You're suddenly looking at the entire landscape and going, the only answer to this is that we are all going to have to close instantly. Not indefinitely. I think, there are sort of certain practical conversations going on about that, but it's such an unpredictable situation. And it was the oddity of going, it's not that this is something that is being enforced on us against our will. We're looking at what's happening around the world and going, this is the only sane and sensible thing that we can all do right now. Of course, I believe fiercely in the value of live art and people congregating together to experience theatre, but not during a pandemic. So we knew that we'd have to close. And as I say, I think what felt comforting was that the immediate priority was safety of audiences, reassurance of the workforce. Definitely, from the perspective of everyone who I've worked with and spoken to, which is really fortunate, just a sense of responsibility and caretaking of the people who might find themselves the most vulnerable in this immediate situation. And I think there has absolutely been, for a lot of people, a really profound sense of dread. Like there's no doubt that it's serious. I as well as working full time at home, which I'm incredibly fortunate in this moment to be doing, I work freelance as well. And my experience, I think, was similar to the rest of most of the freelance workforce, which was a sort of almost instantaneous shutdown, cancellation or postponement of essentially everything. And that's just been so sobering, talking to friends and acquaintances and colleagues on a daily basis, and people just going, I've lost 100% of my work for the next year in a week. And we had no idea, until yesterday evening, we had nothing at all on what was going to happen for the self-employed workforce. And there's still a lot of clarity to be found, I think, which is due to the unprecedented pressure that everyone in every part of the country is having to work under. I mean, I don't need to tell you this. It's been huge.
Yeah. So the work that you're producing for Homemakers, it's, according to the press release, due to start early April. Now it's April next week. So can you tell us anything about what sort of thing we're likely to see, or how we're going to experience the first few pieces yet?
Let me see if I can do that without spoilering. I mean, in terms of time frame, as I say, it was quite a sort of not rapid response project, I guess. But we said to people when we approached artists, we said we're aiming for about a 2-week turnaround on this, which it's not a hard and fast deadline, particularly as everyone is, everyone has their own personal circumstances and things to be dealing with. But it was more a kind of offer of, this wants to be quite a direct project, and we're not expecting you to now spend 6 months pontificating over your sort of grand state of the nation sweeping response. This can be something that's quite live and potentially quite informal. I think that, as I say, there'll be a real range. I think there are some people who are absolutely planning to use video as a format, particularly artists who already work really, really innovatively with that. And what's interesting is speaking to a few companies and just obviously how their making process is being impacted by the circumstances that they're living in. So whereas what might happen if you sort of threw an open brief at people is they go, okay, let's all get in a room and chuck around some ideas, they're thinking about how they meet as artists in around their everyday life, develop their ideas and to kind of assess where they're at and what they might want to put out into the world. I think there will be definitely some things which feel more interactive, in the sense of It might be something that's sent to audiences somehow for them to participate in. And that also feels quite exciting, because I think one of the things that we're thinking about is how we take care of audiences who are completely remote from us in the same way that we would take care of them when we brought them into the theatre. So if you're asking people to experience something which might hit different people in different ways, what do you also need to give them at that first point of contact in order to allow them to enjoy something that is maybe risky and daring and challenging, but which keeps them safe emotionally and, potentially physically? I'm not quite sure what people are going to come up with.
Homemakers aims to launch its first works online in early April 2020. For more information, keep an eye on the theatre's website at homemcr.org. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.